Alright, settle in, because this is going to be a long one, and I need you to really picture this with me, because even now, years later, I still don't fully understand what happened, and the worst part is I don't think it's over. This started last year when I was 22 and completely burned out from work. The kind of burnout where you're technically showing up every day, but mentally you feel detached, like your life belongs to someone else and you're just watching it happen from distance. I had a messy past. I won't go into details, but let's just say there were people and situations I was trying very hard to put behind me, and I desperately needed a few days where nobody could reach me, nobody could find me, and nothing from my old life could follow me. One afternoon, I was venting at work, and a co-worker mentioned this tiny island off the coast of Maine, describing it in the most unappealing way possible. No nightlife, no crowds after sunset, barely any year-round residents. And once the last ferry leaves for the mainland, the place becomes eerily empty. The way he said it, if you stayed overnight, you'd basically have the entire island to yourself, and that sounded exactly like what I needed. So I went home, found a cheap little rental cottage right on the shoreline, noticed the suspiciously low price and immediate availability, ignored every red flag, and booked it without thinking twice. The cottage was small, just one main room with a bed, a kitchenette that looked untouched, and a cramped bathroom, surrounded on three sides by thick brush that pressed against the walls like it was trying to listen in. And the front faced the ocean, with a thin curtain over the only window, thin enough that light could pass through both ways, and the walls were so paper thin I could hear the wind move through the brush like someone whispering directly beside my ear. The door had a deadbolt and a chain lock that looked recently installed, which struck me as odd for such an isolated place. But I brushed it off, took the late ferry over, watched the island empty out as the sun went down, grabbed dinner at a small pub near the dock, where the bartender's expression subtly changed when I told her where I was staying, and walked back in near total darkness, passing a small dock tucked into a cove with a single blue motorboat tied there, noticeably different from the toxins, larger fishing boats I'd seen earlier, and I remember clocking it in my mind, but not thinking much of it. Around 10:30, I locked the deadbolt and chain, lay down, and fell asleep almost instantly from exhaustion. But sometime deep in the night, I woke up without knowing why, and that's when I heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on gravel right outside the cottage door, too heavy and measured to be an animal, and when I shifted slightly in bed, the footsteps stopped immediately, leaving this suffocating silence that felt like someone standing there, listening, waiting, and after a long stretch where I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, the footsteps resumed, coming closer, stopping directly in front of the door, and then a flashlight beam cut through the thin curtain, sweeping slowly across the room while I lay frozen, and then the door handle rattled, the deadbolt held, then it rattled harder, followed by several violent bangs that echoed through the tiny cottage so loudly, I flinched with every impact, and I forced myself out of bed and crouched beside the door, bracing for it to burst open, but instead everything went silent, and then a calm male voice from the other side said, "I know you're in there, Leo," and hearing my name nearly made me shout, but I bit it back, and I didn't recognize the voice, yet he knew exactly who I was, and that I was inside, and I heard him walk along the side of the cottage, circling slowly, like he was savoring it, like he wanted me to know he could reach me from any angle, and for what felt like an eternity, he kept moving around the walls, until finally I heard footsteps retreat toward the dock, and then the unmistakable sound of a small outboard motor starting up and fading into the darkness over open water. I didn't sleep again, and at sunrise I ran outside and saw heavy boot prints circling the cottage multiple times, leading straight toward the dock. and ending at the shoreline, confirming that whoever had been there came by boat specifically to that cottage on that night. And I confronted my co-worker later, who swore he hadn't told anyone, and I believed him. But that left the terrifying question of how someone tracked me to a random island rental with such precision. And the truth is, I have a past that could explain someone wanting to find me, but I still can't understand how they found me there. Years later, I was working as a structural engineer, finishing graduate research on marine concrete degradation, which led to an academic conference in Nagasaki, Japan, where through a professor named Dr. Yamamoto I secured special research access to Hashima Island, a tiny abandoned island once densely populated for coal mining and now restricted due to structural dangers. And unlike tourists who must stay on guided seawall paths, I was allowed to enter certain buildings after signing stacks of liability waivers. I traveled there with an escort named Takeshi, who barely spoke, and as we explored the crumbling apartment blocks, I began noticing strange details, dust patterns, forming paths like someone walked there repeatedly, a room with a strange unfamiliar smell, and a wall that felt inexplicably warm despite no visible sun exposure. And when I reported this to Takeshi, he dismissed it immediately as impossible, refusing to even investigate, which unsettled me more than the discoveries themselves. Later, in another building, I found unmistakable evidence of habitation, blankets and empty water bottles tucked in a corner room. And when I turned to show Takeshi, he had vanished, and the stairwell we'd used was now blocked by rubble. And as panic set in, I heard multiple sets of footsteps behind me in the hallway, not one, and I ran blindly through the maze of corridors until I found another stairwell and made it back outside, where Takeshi stood calmly at the dock, acting as if nothing had happened. And afterward, Dr. Yamamoto became unreachable, as though he had disappeared entirely. And then, going even further back to my last semester of college, when I was writing my thesis on abandoned institutional spaces, I researched North Brother Island in New York City, a long-abandoned quarantine and rehab site off limits to the public, and my friends and I foolishly decided shouldn't have been, and at least once it knew my name. And I don't know if these events are connected, or if I've been followed longer than I realize. But what I do know is that ever since that first night in Maine, I've never truly felt alone, even when I'm sure I am.